And welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm Ben Kennedy. The future of Judge Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court confirmation is really a big question mark tonight.
That's right. A third woman has come forward, claiming Kavanaugh was involved in sexual misconduct years ago. It comes just one day before Kavanaugh and his first accuser, Christine Ford, are set to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee over allegations dating back more than 30 years.
Those of us on the committee have to be prepared for the possibility, indeed the likelihood, that there will be no definitive answers to the large questions before us. In legal terms, the outcome might not be dispositive.
And the president's Supreme Court nominee denies all allegations of sexual assault or misconduct. Abigail Robertson joins us now from Capitol Hill. Abigail, let's start with these newest allegations. This third woman to come out against Kavanaugh, what's she claiming and what has been Kavanaugh's response so far?
Well, first, I want to warn our viewers, if children are in the room, what I'm about to say is not PG. The newest accuser, Julie Swetnick, who is being represented by Stormy Daniels' lawyer, Michael Avenatti, claims that in the 1980s, she witnessed Judge Kavanaugh at many parties drink excessively, engage in abusive and physically aggressive behavior towards girls. And here comes the kicker. She also says that she witnessed efforts by Kavanaugh and his friends to drug girls and then gang rape them inside bedrooms at these parties. And she claims that one night while she was incapacitated, she was a victim of one of these gang rapes at a party where she says Judge Kavanaugh and his friend that we've heard a lot about, Mark Judge, were present. Now, in response to this newest allegation, Judge Kavanaugh denies these claims, saying they are ridiculous and from the Twilight Zone.
Now, Abby, you've been on Capitol Hill pretty much throughout the day. You've been talking to senators. What has been the reaction from lawmakers?
Well, Democrats are calling on President Trump to immediately withdraw Judge Kavanaugh's nomination or direct the FBI to investigate the multiple allegations of sexual assault, saying that they are vile and prove a pattern of predatorial behavior from Kavanaugh. But Republicans like Senator Lindsey Graham greatly disagrees, and he says Kavanaugh is being smeared. And he also says that he has a very difficult time believing any person would routinely go to these parties where gang rapes were apparently taking place and not only not report them, but also continue to attend parties with these people. And he questions the timing of the allegations and the fact that they came forward 2 days before the committee confirmation vote.
Yeah. Abigail, what's on tap for tomorrow? Can you give us any sense of what that will look like?
Well, many lawmakers are hoping and praying that everyone involved is treated respectfully. We'll see about that tomorrow. But the hearing starts at 10 a.m. It will be in a smaller hearing room with limited press at the request of Dr. Ford. Now, Dr. Ford will testify first, and each senator will get 5 minutes to question her, with all the Republicans on the committee expected to yield their time to their counsel, Rachel Mitchell. And then Dr. Ford will leave the room, and Judge Kavanaugh will come in after she is out, and he will be questioned in the same format by the counsel and then by Democrats directly questioning him. And then after the hearing, if Chairman Grassley feels he has the support of all the Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee, then the committee will vote on his nomination on Friday morning at 9:30 a.m. and then send it to the full Senate for a vote next week.
All right, Abigail Robertson for us on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Well, Hadley Heath Manning is Director of Policy at Independent Women's Forum. Hadley, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
On Friday, the committee will vote on proceeding with Kavanaugh's confirmation. Do you think that is the right move?
I do. Unfortunately, the timeline on the accusations that we've seen come up here at the last minute has put lawmakers in a difficult position. It's put the public in a difficult position because it's impossible to know what happened, some 30 odd years ago. But we are a nation of laws and of order, and we have due process. We have the presumption of innocence until guilt can be proven. And unfortunately, in this case, it's going to be very difficult for either party to prove guilt or innocence, but the burden of proof lies with the accusers here.
And Hadley, what do you make of how partisan this whole situation has become?
Oh, it's makes my heart heavy. And I'm sure a lot of viewers feel the same way, that this is what's wrong with our politics, whether it's an accusation of something as serious as sexual assault, or it's one of the many policy issues that we talk about on a day-to-day basis. Too often we simply believe what we want to believe rather than weighing the evidence and the facts as they are in front of us. In the case of Judge Kavanaugh, we have very little evidence, if any, to substantiate any of these claims about things that happened while he was in high school or in college. So we have to stick to the facts that are in front of us, to weigh the evidence as we see it. And of course, we can't forget on the other side of the ledger, the many women and men from across the political spectrum who have spoken so highly of his character. So ultimately, I think it's the right thing to do to move ahead with the vote. And it does sort of represent what's wrong with our politics. But I hope that lawmakers will give a fair hearing to both sides and weigh the evidence and continue to move forward with this confirmation.
And Hadley, you were just talking about the hearing. We are now less than 24 hours away. Christine Blasey Ford and Judge Brett Kavanaugh will get the chance to both tell their side of the story. Do you expect to hear any surprises?
I don't. You know, the Judiciary Committee has retained a lawyer, a female attorney who has specialized in sex crimes her entire life, her entire career, to question Dr. Ford. I think that was a wise move, because ultimately we want to get to the bottom of, the facts of this particular accusation. Even though it was many years ago, lawmakers want to give Dr. Ford the dignity and the respect, the opportunity to be heard. I think that's the right thing to do, not just politically or because of the optics of the situation, but because we want to be a country where if you are the victim of sexual harassment or sexual assault, that you at least will have the opportunity to be heard and to be believed if you can bring a case that has substantial evidence. So in this case, I think the lawmakers are doing the right thing in having this hearing.
And final question, bottom line, at the end of the day, do you still think Kavanaugh should be confirmed to the Supreme Court?
I do, because of what I said about fairness and about due process. It's really a question that each of us should ask. Is this the standard that we want? Is this the precedent that we want to set for how people reach positions of power in our government or in other parts of our society? We don't want to have a standard where unsubstantiated claims can wreck someone's career, and in this case, sort of obstruct the process that we use to maintain and have the appropriate number of justices on the Supreme Court. So I believe that we should weigh the evidence and we should give accusers their fair hearing. But absent any additional evidence, it's not fair to move to block this nomination because of what we've heard so far.
Hadley Heath Manning, the Director of Policy, Independent Women's Forum. Hadley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we're joined now by senior Washington correspondent Jennifer Wishon and our chief political analyst David Brody. Both of you, thank you for being here with us. Jennifer, I want to start with you. Your reaction to all that we've seen come down with Brett Kavanaugh.
Sure, it's been a wild day. I certainly think that the more women that we see come forward, now there are 3, it doesn't bode well for Judge Kavanaugh, certainly in the court of public opinion. Julie Swetnick, who came out in the last 24 hours, she introduced the phrase of gang rape. Such a horrible image that comes with that phrase. And even though she's not accusing Brett Kavanaugh of participating in this assault against her, she's saying that he was around. And so now going into the hearing, that is another phrase that is going to be used. We're not just talking about sexual assault. We're talking about, not talking about attempted rape. We're talking about gang rape now. And did you witness this? And so this is introducing a whole new can of worms that Judge Kavanaugh, even though he's not being directly charged, he has to address this behavior. We know that Americans are very engaged in this. I mean, we're looking at, I think upwards of 60% of Americans say that they are, watching this very closely. And so I think that Judge Kavanaugh has certainly a big performance coming up Thursday.
Now, Jennifer, you're talking about Americans being engaged, but so are lawmakers. I mean, we're now talking about 1, 2, 3 women coming forward. The number continues to grow. Senators are keeping a close eye on this. David, who are some of the make or break senators that could be on the fence now, and they see this number continue to increase? Maybe they're thinking Brett Kavanaugh might not be the guy.
Right. There are 4. Senator Bob Corker and Jeff Flake. These are 2 moderate, well, Jeff Flake is really more of a conservative, but definitely on the fence and a critic of Trump for sure. But Flake and Corker are both lame duck. They're gone. So they have nothing to lose politically. And then Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. So those are the four to watch. So really everybody's talking about the Judiciary Committee hearing. The hearing will be huge tomorrow, but the vote itself will be relatively anticlimactic. I mean, you're going to have the Republicans vote most likely for Judge Kavanaugh and the Democrats vote against. So that's how that'll go down.
Yeah. We hear a lot of talk about guilty or innocent until proven guilty. And with the media involved and all of this that we've seen come down, David, what's your take on how the media has treated Brett Kavanaugh?
That's a really good question. You know, I'll be honest with you. I think it's actually been, I don't want to say relatively fair, but I don't think it's been as horrible as it could have been, and that's because the Democrats played dirty tricks. And because of that, even many of the media members are calling out the Democrats on that. So,
I think of Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that, you know, it has been equal. It really never is with the mainstream media, but I think it's been relatively tame in comparison to others.
So you're saying the Democrats have really overplayed their hand here?
Yeah, I think for sure, and I think what we're going to see at the hearing on Thursday, this is going to be crucial. How much are they going to overplay their hand on Thursday against Kavanaugh? In other words, let's be honest. What we heard from Kavanaugh today, I say heard, but we saw that statement come out, and he said, in retrospect, I cringed basically on many things I did in high school. That's giving Democrats a big-time opening to say, like what exactly? And the like what tomorrow at the hearing will be crucial. In other words, drinking's going to come up. There's going to be some stuff that, you know, kids are going to have to turn away from the television probably. And that is going to open up Democrats to a potential line of overstepping. And I think that's the danger for them. I think the danger for Brett Kavanaugh is how he comes across tomorrow. I mean, I thought the Fox News interview was honestly, it was pedestrian. It's not that he didn't seem credible, but I just thought it was relatively mailed in, and he was being very judicious and a lawyer. He can't be that smart. He has to show more human emotion, but also be in control and not let the Democrats rattle him.
Yeah. David and Jennifer, sticking with the Fox News interview, you heard Kavanaugh say his wife is receiving death threats. Many are wondering, well, why continue? Why not pull out, say, you know what, this is not worth it. My family comes first. I don't want to stay in the running. Why do you feel he's continuing with the process?
Well, I mean, he says that he has nothing to hide, so there's no reason for him to pull out. And I think that, you know, the reward is certainly huge if he can get past this. I mean, that is certainly a pinnacle of success for him to sit on the Supreme Court bench for life. And I think pulling out would show that perhaps he has something to hide, which he, you know. But I do, to David's point, I think that he has opened another can of worms with his, you know, admission that he has done things in his past that make him cringe. You and Abby make the point that, you know, C-SPAN is going to need to do a disclaimer before this hearing starts because it's going to be very raunchy.
Yeah, and real quickly, we just have about 30 seconds left, both of you. Do you think Kavanaugh survives this and is confirmed?
Ladies first.
I think I'm leaning towards yes.
David?
I'm leaning towards no with a quick asterisk, as in if it goes south for Kavanaugh tomorrow, then I think he withdraws because there'll be too much of a court of public opinion that goes against him.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you both. Well, coming up after the break, why President Trump is accusing China of interfering in the midterm elections. That's next.
President Trump is voicing his support for a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians. During a meeting today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the president said two states would work best in terms of bringing peace to that region, and that Israel got a concession when he moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, but they would have to give something to the Palestinians.
There's nothing I would rather do than see peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I think lots of good things are happening. It will take a little time, as you know. It's taken plenty of time, many decades, and nothing's happened. But a lot of good things are happening. Actually, by taking off the table the embassy moving to Jerusalem, that was always the primary ingredient as to why deals couldn't get done. I spoke to many of the negotiating teams, and they said they could never get past the embassy moving into Jerusalem and all of what that meant, which you know what that meant. That meant everything. And now that's off the table. Now that will also mean that Israel will have to do something that will be good for the other side.
And today was the first time since taking office the president has verbalized his support of a two-state solution.
President Trump is accusing China of interfering in the midterm elections. He made that claim while chairing a Security Council session at the United Nations today. It was an accusation that appeared to catch the Chinese delegation by surprise.
Security Council is called to order.
Day 2 at the UN for President Trump included chairing the Security Council on countering nuclear proliferation.
It's a matter of urgent importance concerning and countering the proliferation of deadly chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons and means to deliver them.
Then Trump shifted gears, accusing China of attempting to interfere in the upcoming U.S. midterm elections.
They do not want me or us to win because I am the first president ever to challenge China on trade.
Reaction from China's foreign minister appeared minor, with a look to his side and a shrug. Beijing has denied Trump's claims, as the U.S. and China are locked in a trade war. On Tuesday, Trump talked about a tariff increase to the tune of $200 billion on Chinese imports. Beijing responded by imposing penalties on $60 billion of U.S. products. Trump has said the U.S. will not be taken advantage of any longer.
I need to point out that China has all along followed the principle of non-interference in other countries' domestic affairs. This is a tradition of Chinese foreign policy. Our observance of this principle has received acclaim from the international community. We did not and will not interfere in any country's domestic affairs.
Now, the Chinese foreign minister says China refuses to accept any unwarranted accusations against its country.
CBN News national security correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now for more. Eric, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Let's talk about the president. He accused China of trying to interfere in American elections. What is behind this statement, Eric?
Well, let's just put it out there. The president did today. China is taking a page out of Russia's playbook. You know, China, intelligence sources that I talk with, they say China has a big cybersecurity team. They end up, and they are state-sponsored. They go after us. They go after us on social media. They go after us on different organizations. They even end up rewarding and punishing different reporters here in the United States who do bad stories about them. The president even talked about this during a recent tweet. And if we go to that tweet, we can go ahead and show you exactly what he said. The president actually talked about this very tweet. There it is, that China is actually placing propaganda ads in the Des Moines regional newspaper and other newspapers, and made it to look like news. That's because that we're beating them in trade, opening up markets, and the farmers will make a fortune out of this when it's all over. You know, we're talking a little bit about the farmers, the president said. My intelligence sources actually do say that the farmers are targeted. If the farmers in particular districts actually sold their goods to China, they're getting less money for it if it's a Trump-supported district than those just right across the way. So it's interesting the way that China is really playing this game right now, but the president called them out.
Yeah, he did. Now, Eric, talking about election meddling, you typically think Russia.
Right.
So China was kind of a big surprise today. But with Russia, Trump did talk about Russia when it comes to Syria. What did he say?
Well, when he was talking about Syria, he was saying that the Syrian regime uses biological weapons. We've seen that before. And he was basically saying that this is not going to be tolerated. And he called out both Russia and Iran. And he wanted to let them know that, you know, this is a line in the sand. And if you go past this line in the sand, you will, in fact, have to deal with this. You know, in previous administrations, we've actually given we've given Iran about $150 billion. That's when they needed money. Otherwise, the country would have collapsed. And that was during the Obama administration. We gave them that money, but they ended up using that money to support their terrorists. And they ended up growing that terrorist group to the point where now they want to have biological weapons. Now they want to be able to have nuclear weapons. And the president basically drew the line in the sand and says, you know, because of their past, we are not going to allow them to have any more nuclear weapons.
Eric, just 30 seconds left. What do you think was President Trump's overall message to world leaders?
Well, I think that's it. He's drawn a line in the sand. You know, previous administrations we've seen it with Russia. During the Obama administration, President Obama would draw a line in the sand and Russia would just walk right over it. This administration is not going to allow this to happen. We've seen it from Nikki Haley. We've seen it from Bolton, the national security advisor. We've seen it directly from President Trump.
Right. Eric Rosas, thanks for joining us.
You got it, guys.
We'll have more after the break. The Federal Reserve is going to raise short-term interest rates for the third time this year. Rates will be going up by 0.25%. Now, the rate hike will affect business and consumer loans. Today's announcement from the Fed marks the 8th interest rate increase since 2015. Economists say it is a sign the American economy is doing well.
And Phil Kerpen is the president of American Commitment. He joins us now for more on the economy. Phil, we've seen the tariffs that are getting slapped on China. How is this going to affect the average American at home?
Well, I mean, it means more expensive consumer products, and so you're probably going to notice things on the shelves of Walmart and Costco getting a little bit more expensive as a consequence of this. It's a negative, certainly, for households in the near term. The big question is, does this lead to a rearrangement, a new trade agreement that ultimately is more positive in the long term? And of course, that's what the administration is betting on, that the short-term economic pain that we'll feel a little bit here will be even more painful for China, who's very dependent on their exports to us, and we'll be able to get a new trade agreement with them. And so that's what they're hoping for. And of course, if they succeed, it may ultimately be positive for Americans if we stop them from stealing our intellectual property, some of the other violations that they have. But in the short term, it does mean higher prices for American consumers.
Yeah, and the Federal Reserve is expected to raise its interest rates here again as well. What does that mean for the average person sitting at home?
Well, it means that the mortgage rates will continue to inch up as they have been for the past year or so. It means that business loans will get a little more expensive. Credit cards will get a little bit more expensive. On the other side of the coin, it's good news for savers because it means that your savings account might finally earn some interest. And by the way, I would point out that there are a lot of banks now that are up around 2% interest on savings accounts. So if you're still in one of the major commercial banks that's paying 0 or near 0, you might look into that, do some searches. They are out there. But it's bad news for borrowers and it's good news for savers when interest rates go up.
Right. Okay, Phil, so unemployment obviously at a low rate right now, but Bloomberg, it has this headline, and that headline is underemployment is the new unemployment. What is underemployment, and what are your thoughts on that idea?
Well, underemployment is when someone is working part-time who would prefer full-time work. And those numbers have went up pretty dramatically in the Obama administration. They've been relatively flat recently. But that's going to continue to be, a key metric, especially as we push unemployment down to historic lows. Can we get more shifts and more hours for people who are involuntarily working part-time? And, it goes back to one of the big disappointments of this Congress, that they weren't able to get Obamacare repealed. And in particular, they weren't able to get that employer mandate repealed, because that created a strong disincentive for employers to let people work more than 30 hours a week, because they'd be subject to the employer mandate penalty tax. And that has resulted in a lot of people getting their shifts cut involuntarily. And so one of the incompletes you got to give this Congress is on the healthcare issue. And part of that, I think, is the reason we've continued to see a lot of people working part-time involuntarily.
Yeah. Do you think this so-called economic boom is here for the foreseeable future?
Well, nobody ever knows. Economists there's a saying they've predicted, 10 of the last 5 recessions or something like that, because they're always saying things are about to go south. And, sometimes they actually do. This has been a very long recovery. And I believe that if we hadn't had the Trump administration with their agenda of deregulation and tax cuts, we would probably already be in recession. And so policy can change the business cycle, can certainly have an impact. And I think we've staved off recession, but this is still a very, very long recovery. And the business cycle could turn downwards. No one ever knows exactly when that's going to happen.
Phil Kerpen, great to see you. Thank you again for joining us.
My pleasure. Have a good one.
And that's going to do it for Faith Nation.
We'll see you back here again tomorrow. Have a great night.